It was well past midnight when the Vampire King walked through the empty streets of the city. For centuries he had ruled the shadows, unseen by humans, surviving quietly in the modern world. Skyscrapers, neon lights, late-night cafes. The world had changed, but he had not. His name was Alaric, though no one living remembered it. He had stopped introducing himself to mortals long ago, finding it easier to exist as a ghost among them, a tall figure in a long dark coat who passed through their lives without leaving a trace. That night, he stopped outside a small 24-hour takeaway cafe that was still open. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly against the quiet of the sleeping city. Through the glass window, he could see the place was almost empty, a tired businessman waiting for his order, a delivery driver scrolling through his phone, and one employee working the late shift. A goth girl stood behind the counter. Black hair fell past her shoulders, streaked with faded purple that suggested it had been dyed weeks ago and left to grow out. Dark makeup lined her eyes, and a pair of large headphones hung around her neck. She moved slowly, packing orders with the mechanical boredom of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Alaric stepped inside. The girl barely looked up. She reached for a paper bag and slid it across the counter to the businessman without a word, then turned to wipe down the coffee machine. But the moment Alaric approached the counter, something changed. He froze. For the first time in hundreds of years, something felt different. The scent in the air wasn't normal human blood. It was stronger, rarer, almost intoxicating, like the memory of sunlight on ancient stone, like the first breath of spring after a century of winters. It stirred something deep in his chest, something he had thought long dead. The goth girl finally looked up and met his eyes. For a brief second, the ancient predator who had ruled for 1,000 years felt something he hadn't felt in centuries: shock. Her eyes were pale gray, almost silver in the harsh cafe lighting. There was no recognition in them. No fear, only the tired impatience of a young woman who wanted her shift to end. Alaric slowly leaned closer to her, his voice low enough that no one else in the cafe could hear. "Your blood smells different," the Vampire King whispered. The goth girl frowned, her dark eyebrows drawing together. "What?" He straightened, realizing how strange his words must have sounded. But he couldn't take them back, and he couldn't walk away. "Not now." "Forget it," he said quietly. "I'll have a black coffee." She stared at him for another moment, then shrugged and turned to prepare his order. Weird pickup line, but okay. As she worked, Alaric studied her more carefully. She was young, early 20s, perhaps. There was a small silver ring in her nose and another in her eyebrow. Her fingernails were painted black, though the polish was chipping at the edges. She looked tired, but beneath the exhaustion was something else. A quiet resilience. A stubbornness that came from surviving difficult things alone. She slid the coffee across the counter. $2. He placed a bill on the counter without counting it. "What's your name?" "Why?" "Curiosity." She hesitated, then shrugged again. "Lunar." "Lunar," he repeated. The name suited her. How long have you worked here? Long enough to know that guys who hang around asking questions at 2 in the morning are usually trouble. She raised an eyebrow. No offense. None taken. He took his coffee and walked to a table by the window, sitting where he could watch both the door and the counter. Luna returned to her work, occasionally glancing at him with a mixture of suspicion and mild interest. Alaric didn't drink the coffee. He sat with his hands wrapped around the warm cup, his mind racing through centuries of memory. He knew what her blood meant. Luna was a descendant of the old bloodlines, the humans who had once served as vessels for ancient magic, whose ancestors had been touched by powers older than vampires themselves. Their blood carried traces of that magic still, dormant but present, like embers waiting for wind. Most of them had died out centuries ago, hunted by those who wanted to consume that power. The few who remained had no idea what they were. They lived ordinary lives, never knowing why they sometimes felt watched in the darkness, never understanding why certain shadows seemed to follow them. But Alaric knew. And he knew that if he could sense Luna's blood, others would too. He returned to the cafe the next night, and the night after that. Luna noticed him immediately. You again. Me again. You know there are other coffee places in this city, right? I like this one. She snorted but poured his coffee without further comment. Over the following nights, their conversations grew longer, though neither of them would have called them conversations. Luna complained about rude customers and her tiny apartment with the broken heater. Alaric listened, offering occasional dry observations that sometimes made her laugh. He never told her what he was. He never explained why he kept coming back. But on the 5th night, everything changed. Alaric arrived at his usual time to find the cafe dark. The fluorescent lights were off, and the door was locked. Through the glass, he could see chairs overturned and papers scattered across the floor. His heart, old and slow as it was, clenched with something that felt dangerously close to fear. He circled the building and found a back door hanging open. Inside, the small kitchen was empty, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood. Not enough blood for a death. Just enough for a struggle. Alaric closed his eyes and reached out with senses that humans couldn't imagine. He felt the vibrations of the city around him, the pulse of thousands of lives going about their business. And beneath all of it, faint but distinct, he felt the thread of Luna's blood, that rare, intoxicating signature, leading away into the night. He followed it. The trail led to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, a place of rusted metal and broken windows where the city's forgotten corners collected. Alaric approached silently, his footsteps making no sound on the cracked pavement. Inside, he found 3 figures standing in a circle of dim light cast by a single hanging bulb. 2 of them were young vampires, newly turned, perhaps a century old at most, with the hungry arrogance of those who had not yet learned restraint. They wore expensive clothes and cruel smiles, and they looked at Luna the way wolves looked at wounded prey. Luna herself was sitting on the concrete floor, her back against a support pillar. Her dark makeup was smeared, and there was a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were defiant. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was glaring at her captors with the stubborn fury of someone who refused to give them the satisfaction of her fear. "I told you," one of the young vampires was saying. "I told you I smelled something in that cafe. And here she is, a bloodline descendant, just walking around like she doesn't know what she's worth." "Worth a lot to the right buyer," the other agreed. "Or we could just—" "You could leave," Alaric said. All three of them turned. The young vampire's smiles faltered when they saw him standing in the doorway. "Who are you?" one demanded. Alaric stepped into the light. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't bare his fangs. He simply looked at them with the calm, patient gaze of something that had existed before their great-great-grandparents were born. "I am Alaric," he said quietly. "I have ruled these lands for 1,000 years, though I have not bothered to make myself known to children like you. I am giving you one chance to walk away from this girl and never return. Take it." The young vampires exchanged uncertain glances. They could feel his age, his power, radiating off him like heat from a furnace. But they were young, and youth often meant foolishness. "There are two of us," one said, trying to sound confident. "And she's valuable. We found her first." "You found nothing," Alaric replied. "She is under my protection. Has been since the moment I first saw her. You simply didn't know it." He tilted his head slightly. "Now you do." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, without another word, the two young vampires turned and fled into the darkness. Their footsteps echoed through the warehouse and faded into the night, and then there was only silence. Alaric walked slowly toward Lunar. She was staring at him with wide eyes, her defiance now mixed with confusion and the first tremors of shock. "You," she said. "You're one of them." "A vampire." "Yes." "And you just are what? Scared them away by standing there?" "Something like that." He crouched down in front of her, keeping a careful distance. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to touch her. He simply waited. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Lunar touched her forehead, wincing at the cut. "Just this. They grabbed me when I was closing up the shop, threw me in a car. I thought—" She stopped, her voice wavering for the first time. "I thought they were going to kill me." "They might have," Alaric said honestly. "Or they might have done something worse. Your blood is rare, Lunar. It carries traces of old magic, power that certain creatures crave. You've been lucky that no one noticed until now." "Lucky," as she repeated flatly. "Yeah, I feel super lucky." Despite everything, Alaric felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. Even now, facing something her mind could barely comprehend, she was still herself. Still stubborn. Still refusing to break. "Can you stand?" She nodded and pushed herself up, swaying slightly. Alaric rose with her, still keeping his distance. "I'll take you somewhere safe," he said. "And then we need to talk about what happens next." He took her to his home, a quiet penthouse apartment high above the city, filled with old books and older memories. Lunar sat on a leather couch, wrapped in a blanket he had given her, while Alaric cleaned the cut on her forehead with gentle, practiced movements. "This might sting," he said. "I've had worse." She was quiet for a moment, watching his face. "You've been coming to the cafe every night." "Watching me?" "Yes." "Why?" He set down the antiseptic and sat across from her, choosing his words carefully. "Because I knew what you were the moment I smelled your blood. And I knew that if I could sense it, others would too, eventually. I wanted to protect you before that happened." "Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Alaric looked away, toward the windows and the glittering city beyond. "I have lived for a very long time, Lunar. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched generations of humans live and die. Somewhere along the way, I stopped caring about any of it. I existed, but I had no purpose. No reason to be anything other than what I was, a shadow, passing through time." He turned back to her. "And then I walked into that cafe, and I saw you. A young woman working a late shift, tired and bored and completely unaware that she carried something precious in her blood. And I thought, oh, if I let something happen to her, if I walk away and pretend I didn't notice, then what am I? What has any of this been for?" Lunar stared at him. Her grey eyes were softer now, the defiance giving way to something more uncertain. More vulnerable. "So you just, decided to be my protector? Without asking me?" "I didn't know how to ask. I didn't know how to explain any of this without sounding insane." He spread his hands. "I still don't. But here we are." She was quiet for a long time. Then she let out a slow breath and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Those two tonight," she said. "They'll come back, won't they? Or others like them?" "Perhaps. Word will spread about what you are. Some will be curious. Some will be greedy. Some will simply want to see if the stories about bloodline descendants are true." "And what will you do?" "Whatever I have to," Alaric said simply. "I will stand between you and anyone who means you harm. For as long as it takes." Lunar frowned. "But that's crazy. You can't just put your life on hold to babysit some random girl you met at a coffee shop. You're not random. And this isn't babysitting." He leaned forward slightly, his ancient eyes meeting her young ones. "You have value, Lunar. Not because of your blood, but because of who you are. I've watched you handle rude customers with grace. I've seen you give your own dinner to a homeless man outside the cafe. I've heard you sing along to your music when you think no one is listening, and your voice is beautiful, even when you don't know the words." Lunar's cheeks flushed slightly beneath her dark makeup. "You're kind of creepy, you know that?" "I've been told." But she was almost smiling now, and that was enough. The weeks that followed were strange for both of them. Alaric made arrangements. He spoke to the other vampires in the city, the ones who respected his age and authority, and made it clear that Lunar was under his protection. He acquired wards from practitioners of old magic and placed them around her apartment, her workplace, the routes she walked each day. He became a quiet presence in her life, not controlling, not possessive, simply there. Watching. Waiting. Ready. Lunar, for her part, adapted faster than he expected. She asked questions about his world, and he answered them honestly. She learned about the bloodlines, about the magic that slept in her veins, about the history she had never known she was part of. Some nights she was angry about it, furious that she had been kept in the dark her whole life. Other nights she was curious, eager to understand. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the city was sleeping, they simply talked. About music and books and the way the world had changed. About loneliness and purpose and the strange comfort of finding someone who understood. "You could have just left me," Lunar said one night. That first night in the cafe. "You could have walked out and never come back." "I could have," Alaric agreed. "But you didn't." "No." "Why?" "Really?" He thought about it for a long moment. "Because I was tired of being nothing. Tired of drifting through centuries without meaning. And when I saw you, when I realized what you were and what danger you were in, something woke up inside me. Something I thought I had lost centuries ago." He looked at her. "You gave me a purpose, Lunar. Without even knowing it." She was quiet, processing his words. "That's a lot of pressure to put on a girl who works at a takeaway cafe," she finally said. "I know. I'm sorry." But she shook her head. "Don't be. I think maybe I needed something too. Someone who saw me as more than just the weird goth girl behind the counter." She smiled slightly. "Even if that someone is a 1,000-year-old vampire who sniffs blood." "I don't sniff blood." "You definitely sniff blood." "It was one time." She laughed, and the sound filled his quiet apartment with warmth he hadn't felt in centuries. As months passed, the threats gradually faded. Word spread through the shadow world that the vampire king had returned from his long silence, and that he protected the bloodline descendant with all his ancient power. The greedy and the curious found easier targets. The ones who might have come for Lunar decided that no prize was worth facing Alaric. But he didn't stop watching over her. Even when the danger lessened, he remained. Not because he had to, but because somewhere along the way, protecting Lunar had become the most important thing in his long, long life. She moved to a better apartment, one he helped her afford, though she insisted on paying him back eventually. She went back to school, studying art history, something she had always wanted to do but never thought she could. She dyed her hair fresh purple and got a new piercing and started singing along to her music even when she knew people were listening. And Alaric watched her flourish. Watched her grow from a tired, bored girl behind a counter into a young woman who carried herself with quiet confidence, who knew what she was and wasn't afraid of it anymore. One evening, as they sat together on the rooftop of her building watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and pink, Lunar turned to him. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For choosing me. For staying. For being the weird vampire guardian I never knew I needed." She smiled, and there was no sarcasm in it this time, no defensive humor. Just warmth. Just gratitude. "You changed my life, Alaric. And I think maybe I changed yours too." He looked at her, this strange, stubborn, wonderful girl who had given him a reason to exist, and felt something he hadn't felt in 1,000 years. "Peace." "You did," he said quietly. "More than you know." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The city hummed around them, full of life and noise and a million small stories unfolding in the shadows. And high above it all, a vampire and a goth girl watched the night begin, content in the knowledge that some meetings, even the strange ones in late-night cafes, could change everything. The world had changed countless times over the centuries. But for the first time in his endless existence, Alaric didn't mind. Because now he had something worth protecting. And that made all the difference.